If you take a look at the sort of pieces I decide to perform for this channel, it is no secret that I'm a big fan of Liszt. It is also well known that the world is too. Liszt's fast passages and hard pieces get a lot of eyes on YouTube, and he was not a stranger to being idolized by the world when he was alive. That begs the question, why is this? What made him so popular, and why is he still one of the greats today? So today, I'm going to take you on a deep dive into Liszt's life and answer these questions and more. So stick around and let's get into the life of Liszt. Franz Liszt was the only child of Adam and Anna Liszt, being born on October 22, 1811 in the city of Rieding in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Liszt's father was an amateur musician, with proficiency in the piano, cello, guitar and flute. Like a lot of prodigies, Liszt began to improvise at the piano from before the age of 5 years old, guided with encouragement by his father, who was delighted to see the gift of music adopted by his son. Liszt's musical influence at his young age was diverse and influenced a lot of the more musically daring compositional styles he would employ when composing later on. He was, of course, influenced by his father and the mainstream musicians of the time. Liszt, however, was also influenced by the touring Romani bands around Hungary, which he would hear the harsh sounding and bold harmonies from. You can see this influence the most in his Hungarian Rhapsodies, which readily incorporate these themes. Funded by Liszt's success as a child prodigy performer, his father, aware of his son's need for opportunities, ventured with Liszt to Vienna. His tutor in Vienna was Karl Czerny, who himself had been a student of Beethoven. At the time, Czerny was burdened with a heavy workload and teaching roster and was not willing to let Liszt become his student. However, upon hearing Liszt play, he would teach Liszt weekly, free of charge, for 18 months. Liszt's gratitude for this is shown in his dedication of the Transcendental Etudes set to Czerny, a piece from which you are listening to now. Liszt achieved great success in Vienna, allowing him and his family connections with wealthy aristocrats across Europe. Shortly after his public debut, Adam Liszt would take his son and wife to Paris, funded by the wealth they had built up after Liszt's lucrative work in Vienna. In 1823, at the age of 13, Liszt began his Parisian career, with his opera debuting shortly after his 14th birthday. At this point, it is clear that Liszt is a once-in-a-generation musician. However, it is not yet that he would become a once-in-a-century musician. This would come in due time. First, however, Liszt would endure great hardship. Liszt's father would die suddenly in 1827. This deeply affected Liszt, who was very close with his father. He would give up many of his occupations, such as composing and touring, resorting to teaching piano and composition in order to keep his head above water. He was thrown into a depression and became very ill. The dark years that followed lasted until 1832, in which a single concert would change the course of his life and the course of music history as a whole. In 1832, Liszt attended a concert by Niccolò Paganini, a fabled violinist who was said to have been the best violinist to ever live. Liszt would become so inspired by his virtuosity, a virtuosity so great that he is said to have sold his soul to the devil for, that Liszt vowed that he would become the Paganini of the piano, that is to say, that Liszt vowed to become the best pianist to have ever lived. A result of this resolution is the piece you are listening to right now, which is number 3 of the Grande Etude Transcendentale d'Opera Paganini, the 1838 version of what would later be revised to become the Grande Etude de Paganini, the version that most people are familiar with. The technical difficulty of these pieces is unmatched, with many people believing that number 4 of the set is the hardest piece to have ever seriously been composed for piano. In 1833, Liszt would begin a relationship with a Countess Marie de Gault, who was a married woman. They would have a daughter Blandine in 1835. For the next few years, they would tour Switzerland and Italy, with Liszt and Marie de Gault's second daughter being born in Como, Italy. These years of travel were the inspiration for Liszt's famous set of pieces, Years of Pilgrimage, which were published a bit later in 1842. The couple would, after a long period of a waning relationship, separate in 1844. When Liszt was touring Europe in the early 1840s, the feverish enthusiasm and support that would soon be dubbed Lisztomania began to emerge. Women fought over his cigar stubs, silk handkerchiefs, gloves, and more so that they could keep these items as souvenirs. His concerts would have an electric energy filled by an audience that was dying to get closer to him. This Lisztomania was, of course, a huge income to Liszt. He became a philanthropist, donating large sums of money to humanitarian causes. In 1847, in a tour in Ukraine, Liszt met his to-be long-term partner, Caroline Zuzanne Wittgenstein. A few weeks later, Liszt would elect to retire from his role as a travelling virtuoso, settling in Weimar, Germany, his presence in which would result in Weimar building a reputation as a hub for modern music, thanks to Liszt's students there pioneering some of the future great developments to music. Come 1861, after a long stint in Weimar, Liszt would aim to be wed with Caroline in Rome, as Caroline had been able to secure an annulment. Their marriage would be blocked, however, by the Catholic Church. This caused Caroline to largely become a recluse and to give up on any and all attempts to marry Liszt, dedicating a significant part of her life to writing a criticism of the Catholic Church. Liszt would, from 1872 onwards, spend his time in three separate areas: Weimar, Budapest, and Rome. In 1881, Liszt suffered a fall down a flight of stairs, which rendered him bedridden for 3 weeks thereafter. Since around 1877, he had been plagued by a deep sense of depression caused by death anxiety and desolation. This was reflected in his music, a piece from which era you are listening to now. In 1886, Liszt would travel to northern Germany to support his daughter's attempts to host a festival. He died during the festival from pneumonia on the 31st of July 1886 at the age of 74. Liszt lived, compared to a lot of other composers, a long life. This allows us to see a great evolution in his philosophy, his life, and subsequently his music. He had simple exercises that he composed as a child that morphed into gargantuan etudes that virtuosos struggle with. He had light-hearted works that contrasted with the nihilistic reflections of his internal struggle he composed in his later years. Liszt will remain one of the greats of classical piano music, and continues to be one of the world's favourite musicians of the Romantic era. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, I'm sure you will enjoy the one on screen right now, so have a look at that one. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.